One question that changed everything. Who can you help today? If you are tired of learning English, if you are living in the United States but still feel invisible, small, or even ready to quit, that question might annoy you. It used to annoy me too. I thought my problem was grammar. I thought my pronunciation was not good enough. I thought I needed more vocabulary, more practice, more confidence. But the truth was simple. I did not lack English. I lacked a reason to use it. My journey to finding purpose did not begin with a perfect sentence. It began with helping someone else. When I first moved to the U.S., I imagined everything would feel exciting. New opportunities. New culture. A better future. But no one talks enough about the quiet loneliness. I lived in a state where winters were cold and gray. The wind felt sharper than I expected. Some mornings, I sat in my car outside work for 5 extra minutes, just breathing, trying to gather courage before walking inside. Not because the job was impossible. Because speaking felt impossible. Have you ever known exactly what you wanted to say in English, but your mouth refused to cooperate? Your brain freezes. Your heart beats faster. You suddenly forget simple words like meeting or schedule. There is science behind this. When you feel anxious, the amygdala in your brain activates your fear response. Stress hormones increase. And your working memory, the part responsible for language processing, becomes weaker. In simple words, the more afraid you are of making mistakes, the harder it becomes to speak clearly. Your nervous system chooses survival over fluency. I blamed myself for months. I watched real English story practice videos. I wrote down phrases. I repeated sentences slowly at home. I could understand more and more. But at work, in real conversations, I became quiet again. Silence became my habit. In America, small talk is normal. How's your day going? Any plans for the weekend? Simple questions. But to me, they felt like exams. I worried about sounding strange. I worried about cultural differences. I worried about saying something that did not fit. One rainy afternoon, I sat alone in my apartment. The rain in the U.S. felt different from the rain in my home country. It was steady, calm, almost emotionless. I remember staring at the window and asking myself a dangerous question. What if I never feel confident here? That question hurt. But another question slowly replaced it. Who can you help today? At first, it sounded unrelated. I needed help. I was the one struggling. Why should I think about helping someone else? But psychology explains something powerful. Studies about what researchers call the helper's high show that when we help others, our brain releases dopamine and oxytocin. These chemicals increase motivation, reduce stress, and improve emotional regulation. When stress decreases, language performance improves. Helping others does not just make you kind. It makes you braver. I did not understand all of this at that moment. I only felt tired of focusing on my fear. Every day, I asked myself, am I good enough? Is my English improving? Did I say that correctly? My attention was always on my weakness. And whatever you focus on grows. So I tried something small. I decided that the next time I had a chance, instead of worrying about my English, I would focus on being useful. Even if my sentence was simple. Even if my grammar was imperfect. Maybe you are in the same place right now. You are watching this video to practice slow, clear English listening and speaking. You want better pronunciation. You want natural American English. But deeper than that, you want belonging. You want to feel that you deserve your place in this country. I understand that feeling. My life in the United States was not just about language. It was about climate differences, work pressure, cultural misunderstandings, and later, challenges in love and marriage. There were moments when I felt I did not fit anywhere, neither fully American nor fully the person I used to be. But everything began to shift the day I stopped asking, how can I improve my English? And started asking, how can I use my English to help someone? The difference sounds small. It changes everything. When you speak to impress, you feel pressure. When you speak to help, you feel purpose. And purpose is stronger than fear. That rainy day, sitting by the window, I did not know my life was about to change. I did not know that a simple act of kindness would lead me to deeper relationships, stronger communication skills, and even love. I did not know that helping others would slowly heal my insecurity and build real confidence in American English. But it did. This is not just a story about learning English in the U.S. It is a story about finding meaning in service. So before we continue, let me ask you again, slowly. Who can you help today? Your answer might become the beginning of your transformation. The cold morning that woke me up. Imagine stepping outside at 6:30 a.m. The sky still half asleep, the air sharp against your face, and realizing that the weather feels exactly like your confidence, cold, uncertain, and slightly hostile. That was my second winter in the United States. I used to think climate was just about temperature. But living in America taught me that climate shapes behavior, mood, and even communication style. In colder states, people move quickly. Conversations are shorter. Smiles are polite but brief. Efficiency matters. At work, meetings started on time. Emails were direct. Small talk existed, but it had limits. For someone still practicing English, that environment felt intimidating. When I first started working there, I noticed something interesting. In my home country, conversations often begin indirectly. You build warmth first. In the U.S., especially in professional settings, clarity is kindness. People say what they mean. They expect you to do the same. But when your English is slow, clarity feels dangerous. One morning, my manager asked me a simple question. Can you update the client by noon? My brain translated the sentence. Yes, I understood it. But instead of answering clearly, I said something like, I will try my best, maybe it is possible. He paused. Not angry. Just confused. In American workplace culture, I will try often sounds uncertain. What he needed was either yes, I can, or no, I need more time. My indirect answer created doubt. That small moment taught me something powerful about cultural communication differences. Sometimes language problems are not vocabulary problems. They are mindset problems. Research in cross-cultural psychology explains this difference as low-context versus high-context communication. The U.S. is considered a low-context culture. Messages are explicit. Words carry the meaning. In high-context cultures, meaning is often implied. Tone and situation matter more. When you don't know this, you blame your English. When you understand it, you adjust your strategy. That morning, standing near the office window and watching snow fall lightly, I realized something uncomfortable. I was trying to protect myself from mistakes instead of trying to be useful. My indirect answer was not about grammar. It was about fear. Fear of being wrong. Fear of being judged. Fear of sounding not American enough. But here is the strange part. That same week, something small happened outside of work that began to change me. My elderly neighbor was struggling to carry groceries up the stairs. I had seen her before. We exchanged polite smiles but never real conversation. Normally, I would avoid interaction because I worried about my English. That day, maybe because of the cold, maybe because I was tired of hiding, I walked toward her. "Do you need help?" I asked. Slowly. Clearly. She smiled. "That would be wonderful." The sentence was simple. No complex grammar. No impressive vocabulary. Just real English. As we walked upstairs together, she asked me where I was from. I answered in short sentences. I spoke slowly. She listened patiently. When I didn't know a word, I described it differently. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt focused. My goal was not to sound fluent. My goal was to carry her groceries safely and make sure she was okay. And something unexpected happened. I forgot to be afraid. This is where neuroscience becomes interesting again. When your attention shifts from self-evaluation to problem-solving, the brain reduces activity in areas associated with social anxiety. You enter a mild flow state. Your brain prioritizes action over self-criticism. In simple terms, helping her gave my brain a better job than worrying. After we reached her apartment, she said, "You're very kind." Thank you. That sentence stayed with me longer than any compliment about my grammar ever could. Driving to work the next day, the air was still cold. The winter had not changed. The American workplace culture had not changed. My accent had not magically disappeared. But something inside me felt warmer. I began to experiment. At work, instead of focusing on sounding perfect, I focused on being clear and helpful. If someone asked a question, I answered directly. If I did not understand, I said, "Could you repeat that more slowly, please?" Simple. Honest. Effective. And here is the secret. people respected clarity more than perfection. Living in the U.S. taught me that confidence is often interpreted as competence. When you speak clearly, even with an accent, people respond positively. Studies on communication perception show that listeners judge confidence within seconds, often based on tone rather than grammar accuracy. So I practiced one small habit: short sentences, clear answers, slow breathing. Yes, I can finish it by noon. I need one more day. Could you explain that again? Real English. Real life. That winter did not become warmer. But I became braver. And bravery did not come from mastering advanced vocabulary. It came from a staircase, a bag of groceries, and one decision to help instead of hide. Looking back, that was the first crack in the wall of fear I had built around myself. I did not know it yet, but that small act of service would lead me toward deeper relationships, unexpected love, and a new understanding of purpose in America. Sometimes transformation does not arrive like sunshine. Sometimes it arrives wearing a winter coat and carrying groceries. Work pressure and silent doubt. There is a special kind of exhaustion that does not come from physical labor. It comes from pretending you understand everything. That was my daily routine during my first year working in the United States. I would arrive early, smile politely, open my laptop, and prepare myself for meetings where everyone spoke just a little too fast. Not fast for them. Fast for me. Have you ever sat in a meeting, nodding slightly, hoping no one asks you a direct question? You catch maybe 70% of the conversation. The missing 30% feels dangerous. Your brain tries to fill the gaps. Sometimes it guesses correctly. Sometimes it creates completely wrong meanings. Cognitive scientists call this cognitive load. When you operate in a second language, your brain uses more energy to process sound, grammar, and meaning at the same time. Add workplace pressure, and your mental battery drains quickly. By 3 p.m., I often felt like I had run a marathon, without moving. But here is the uncomfortable truth. Most of my stress did not come from my coworkers. It came from the story inside my head. They think you're slow. Your accent sounds strange. You should be better by now. That inner voice was louder than any meeting discussion. One afternoon, my team was discussing a new project timeline. Numbers were mentioned. Deadlines were adjusted. At one point, someone asked, "Does that work for everyone?" Silence. Then people nodded. I nodded too. But I did not fully understand the final deadline. Later that week, I realized I had misunderstood an important detail. I felt embarrassed. I blamed my English again. But when I finally explained the confusion to a colleague, she looked surprised. "Why didn't you just ask?" she said gently. That question hit me harder than any criticism. Why didn't I just ask? In American work culture, asking clarifying questions is often seen as responsibility, not weakness. Direct communication prevents bigger problems later. But because of my background, I had associated questions with incompetence. I thought confident people understood everything immediately. That belief was wrong. Research in workplace psychology shows that teams perform better when members feel psychologically safe, meaning they can ask questions without fear of humiliation. The problem was not my English. The problem was that I did not feel safe inside my own mind. Around that time, I started volunteering once a week at a small community center that supported new immigrants. I did not join because I felt confident. I joined because I remembered how lost I had felt with paperwork, healthcare forms, and simple phone calls. The first evening I walked in, I almost turned around. What if my English was not good enough to help anyone? What if I made mistakes while explaining something important? But then I saw a young man staring at a stack of documents, his forehead tight with stress. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself. I sat down next to him. Let's look at it together, I said. Slowly. Calmly. The forms were about employment authorization. Government language. Complicated vocabulary. I did not know every word. So we read line by line. When we found a difficult phrase, I said, let's search this. We broke long sentences into smaller pieces. Something interesting happened again. When I focused on helping him understand, I forgot to judge my own grammar. My English did not need to be perfect. It needed to be clear. Clarity over perfection. That night, driving home under the orange glow of streetlights, I realized I had spoken more English in 2 hours at the community center than I had spoken in 3 days at work. And I felt energized, not exhausted. Why? Because the purpose was different. At work, I spoke to protect my image. At the center, I spoke to solve a problem. Motivation theory explains this difference as extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. When you act to avoid judgment, stress increases. When you act to create value, motivation becomes internal and sustainable. Slowly, I began to apply the same mindset at my job. Instead of thinking, I hope I don't make mistakes, I shifted to, how can I make this easier for the team? The shift was subtle but powerful. In meetings, I started asking simple questions. Just to confirm, the deadline is Friday, correct? Do you mean we should update the client weekly? Short sentences. Clear intention. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. In fact, sometimes other colleagues said, "Oh, good question." I had spent months hiding because I thought I was behind. But maybe I was not behind. Maybe I was just learning in a different rhythm. Living and working in the U.S. taught me that competence is not about speaking fast. It is about communicating clearly. It is about being willing to engage. And here is the deeper lesson. When you use your English to reduce someone else's stress, your own insecurity becomes smaller. Helping others did not magically erase my accent. It did not instantly solve cultural misunderstandings. But it gave me something stronger than confidence. It gave me direction. I was no longer just an immigrant trying to survive in an American workplace. I was someone building bridges, between languages, between systems, between people who felt lost in a country that often moves too fast. That realization planted a new thought in my heart. Maybe my struggle with English was not a weakness. Maybe it was training. Training to understand others. Training to be patient. Training to help. And I did not know it yet, but this new mindset would soon change not only my career, but my love life too. The day I almost gave up. There is a quiet moment before someone quits. It does not look dramatic. There is no music. No audience. Just a simple thought, maybe this is not for me. That thought visited me one Friday evening. It had been a long week. At work, I had tried to be more direct, more engaged, more American in my communication. But progress felt slow. Small misunderstandings still happened. I still replayed conversations in my head while driving home. Why did I say it that way? Why didn't I use a better word? Did they notice my mistake? When you live in a second language, your brain rarely rests. Even after conversations end, your mind continues editing them. Linguists sometimes call this post-conversation rumination. It is common among non-native speakers, especially in high-performance environments like the U.S. workplace. That Friday, I opened my laptop at home and searched something dangerous. Is it too late to start over in another country? I wasn't planning to leave immediately. But the search revealed my exhaustion. I felt stuck between two identities. In my home country, I had been confident and expressive. In America, I felt reduced to short sentences and careful grammar. The gap between who I was and who I felt I had become hurt deeply. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the community center. One of the volunteers couldn't come the next morning. They needed help. My first reaction was selfish. I am tired. I need rest. But something inside me whispered, go anyway. The next morning, I drove there with low energy and low expectations. I told myself I would stay only 1 hour. Just enough to be polite. Inside, a small group had gathered for an information session about local housing policies. In the United States, housing rules, lease agreements, and tenant rights can be confusing, even for native speakers. For immigrants, the legal language feels like a maze. A young couple sat in the front row. They looked overwhelmed. When the speaker explained something about security deposits and maintenance responsibilities, they exchanged worried glances. After the session, they approached the volunteer table. Can you explain this part again? The woman asked softly. Her English was hesitant. Careful. I recognized that tone immediately. I took a deep breath. Of course, I said. Let's go step by step. We sat together. I explained the difference between landlord responsibility and tenant responsibility in simple English. I used examples. I drew a small diagram on scrap paper. When they did not understand a word, I rephrased it. Slower. Clearer. And something shifted inside me again. While helping them, I forgot my own frustration. I was not the confused immigrant anymore. I was the bridge. Psychologists describe meaning as a powerful buffer against burnout. When your actions align with a sense of contribution, stress feels lighter. The situation may be the same, but your interpretation changes. That morning, I realized something that almost made me laugh. I had been measuring my worth by fluency speed, by accent clarity, by how native I sounded. But those two people did not care about my accent. They cared that I listened. They cared that I stayed patient. They cared that I did not rush them. In fact, my slower English became an advantage. Because I spoke slowly, they understood more. Because I had struggled before, I explained gently. On my way home, I did not search for other countries. I searched for something else. How does helping others affect mental health? The research was clear. Acts of service increase life satisfaction. They reduce symptoms of depression. They strengthen social connection. And social connection improves language confidence. It was like discovering a hidden formula. Purpose reduces fear. Reduced fear improves communication. Improved communication builds confidence. Not the other way around. I had spent months believing I needed confidence first in order to participate fully in American life. But maybe participation creates confidence. Maybe helping creates belonging. That realization stopped me from quitting. Life in the United States is not simple. There are policy systems to understand, financial pressures, cultural codes that are not always explained. Later, in my marriage, there would be even more complex conversations about family expectations, parenting styles, and values shaped by different cultures. But that Saturday morning marked a turning point. I stopped asking, "Am I good enough to be here?" I started asking, "How can I serve while I am here?" The question is subtle, but it changes the direction of your energy. When you focus only on self-improvement, progress feels slow and lonely. When you focus on contribution, growth becomes a side effect. That was the day I almost gave up on my American journey. And it was also the day I chose to stay. I did not know it yet, but soon. This new version of me, the one who served instead of hid, would meet someone who would change my life in a completely different way. Sometimes, the moment you almost quit is the exact moment your real story begins. A small act, a new direction. You rarely notice the exact second your identity begins to change. There is no announcement. No applause. Just a slightly different decision than the one you would have made before. For me, that decision was simple: show up again. After that Saturday at the community center, I told myself I would volunteer regularly. Not because I was confident. Not because my English was perfect. But because for the first time since arriving in the United States, I felt useful. And usefulness is powerful. The following weeks, I helped people fill out job applications, understand school enrollment forms for their children, and prepare basic introductions for interviews. I repeated simple phrases many times. My name is. I have experience in. I am looking for an opportunity to. Real English. Practical English. Slow and clear. Something unexpected happened during those sessions. While guiding others through sentences, I was practicing too. But it did not feel like studying. It felt like building. There is a concept in psychology called learning by teaching. Research shows that when you explain information to someone else, your brain organizes knowledge more deeply. You remember better. You understand more clearly. Teaching forces structure. Without realizing it, helping others was strengthening my own English foundation. One evening, a middle-aged man came in looking defeated. He had lived in the U.S. for years but avoided speaking English whenever possible. His daughter usually translated for him. But now she had moved to another state. "I feel stupid," he said quietly. That sentence hurt me. Because I had whispered the same words about myself months earlier. "You are not stupid," I told him. "You are learning." We practiced a short phone call script together. Just 5 sentences to schedule a doctor's appointment. We repeated them slowly. We laughed when pronunciation sounded strange. By the end, he said, "Maybe I can try." That maybe felt like victory. Driving home that night, I realized something profound. My purpose was not to impress native speakers. It was to reduce fear, first in others, then in myself. And here is the paradox. The more I focused on reducing someone else's fear, the less power my own fear had. Neuroscience supports this shift. When we act in alignment with values, like kindness or service, the prefrontal cortex becomes more active. This region is responsible for rational thinking and emotional regulation. In simple terms, purpose calms panic. At work, I noticed subtle changes too. I volunteered to help onboard a new employee who was also an immigrant. We met for coffee during lunch. I shared what I had learned about communication style, about asking direct questions, about not apologizing for every small mistake. While speaking to him, I heard my own advice clearly for the first time. Speak to be clear, not to be perfect. That sentence became my personal rule. In American culture, especially in professional settings, clarity builds trust. When you say what you mean, people relax. They know how to respond. Perfection is admired, but clarity is respected. And clarity is achievable, even with simple vocabulary. Slowly, my coworkers began including me more in discussions. Not because my accent disappeared, but because my hesitation did. I still made mistakes. But I corrected them lightly and moved on. Confidence, I discovered, is not the absence of mistakes. It is the refusal to hide because of them. Meanwhile, my time at the community center introduced me to many stories of struggle, adaptation, cultural confusion, and hope. America is not just policies and systems. It is people trying to build lives between two worlds. One evening, after a long session helping families prepare for a local school meeting, I stayed behind to clean up chairs. Another volunteer stayed too. We had spoken briefly before, but never deeply. She smiled and said, "You're really patient with everyone." I laughed softly. I wasn't always patient with myself. That conversation lasted longer than expected. We talked about climate differences between states, about how winter can feel lonely, about how American culture values independence while many of us come from cultures that value interdependence. For the first time in a long while, I did not overthink my English. I listened. I responded. I stayed present. Later, I would realize that this conversation was not random. It was the beginning of something more personal, something that would test my communication skills in ways no workplace ever could. But in that moment, I only knew one thing: helping others had quietly redirected my life. I had arrived in the United States searching for success. I stayed because I found purpose. And purpose, once discovered, changes the direction of every conversation that follows. When helping others tested my marriage. Purpose is beautiful in theory. But in real life, purpose demands time. And time always costs something. As I became more involved in helping immigrants at the community center, my schedule changed. Weeknights that used to be quiet became busy. Saturdays that once belonged to rest became service days. At first, my spouse supported me completely. "I'm proud of you," they said. And I believed we were moving forward together. But purpose can unintentionally create distance if communication is not strong. In American culture, independence is often celebrated. Follow your dream. Do what fulfills you. But in marriage, fulfillment cannot become isolation. One evening, after a long volunteer session, I came home energized. I started sharing stories about the man who made his first phone call in English. About a young mother who cried when she understood a school form for the first time. Halfway through my story, I noticed silence. "You're not really here anymore," my spouse said softly. That sentence stopped me. "What do you mean?" "You're always thinking about helping everyone else. But when was the last time you asked how I'm doing?" It wasn't anger. It was honesty. And honesty, especially in marriage, can feel uncomfortable, but it is necessary. In that moment, I realized something important. I had found purpose in helping others. But I had neglected the person closest to me. In psychology, there is something called compassion fatigue. When you give emotionally to many people, your energy becomes limited. You may come home physically present but emotionally drained. I was giving patience to strangers, but offering exhaustion to my spouse. That night, we had one of the most difficult conversations since moving to the United States. We talked about loneliness, about cultural stress, about how immigration had changed both of us differently. Living in a new country tests identity. It also tests relationships. In our home country, extended family was nearby. Support systems were natural. In the U.S., everything felt self-managed. Bills, paperwork, careers, language barriers, it all added invisible pressure. We realized we had both been silently struggling. So we made a simple agreement. I would continue helping at the community center. But we would protect one evening each week, no volunteering, no extra work, no phones. Just us. Marriage, like language, requires practice. You cannot assume understanding. You must create it. That week, during our protected evening, we tried something small but powerful. We spoke honestly, slowly, clearly, about fears we had never expressed. "I'm afraid of failing here," my spouse admitted. "I'm afraid of never feeling enough," I responded. Real English. Real emotion. Not perfect grammar. Just truth. Research from relationship studies at institutions like the University of Washington shows that emotional responsiveness, simply acknowledging your partner's feelings, strengthens long-term stability more than grand gestures. So instead of solving everything, we listened. And something shifted. Helping others had given me purpose. But repairing my marriage gave me balance. Without balance, purpose becomes obsession. With balance, purpose becomes sustainable. Over the next months, our relationship grew stronger, not because stress disappeared, but because communication improved. I also began inviting my spouse to community events occasionally. Not as obligation, but as shared experience. When they saw the people I was helping, my passion became visible, not abstract. And when I came home, I became more intentional. Before talking about anyone else's story, I would ask, "How was your day?" Simple question. Powerful impact. If you are building a life in the United States, or anywhere new, remember this: success is not only measured by career growth or community impact. It is also measured by who still feels close to you at the end of the day. Helping others taught me confidence. Marriage taught me humility. Both were necessary. But the journey was not finished. Because soon, an unexpected challenge at work would force me to choose between security and purpose. And that decision would redefine everything. Who can you help today? And who might need your attention at home? The day I had to choose, security or purpose. Stability feels safe. A steady job. Predictable income. Clear expectations. In a country like the United States, where rent is high, healthcare is expensive, and competition is constant, security matters. For a long time, I told myself, be grateful. Stay quiet. Don't risk too much. That mindset protected me in the beginning. But growth eventually challenges comfort. One afternoon, my manager called me into a meeting. There were changes coming, department restructuring, new leadership, new performance expectations. Nothing dramatic. Just corporate language that meant, adapt or fall behind. I walked back to my desk with a strange feeling. For months, I had been helping others find confidence. But at work, I was still playing small. I spoke clearly, but rarely first. I contributed ideas, but only when asked. I stayed safe. That evening, during our protected marriage night, I shared my frustration. I think I'm capable of more, I said. Then why don't you try? My spouse asked. Fear. Not fear of English anymore. Fear of visibility. In America, professional culture rewards initiative. Speaking up is often interpreted as leadership. Silence, even if thoughtful, can be misunderstood as disengagement. I had learned the language, but I had not fully stepped into my voice. The next week, I made a decision that scared me. I volunteered to lead a small internal training session, nothing huge, just a team workshop about improving communication across departments. Ironically, the topic was something I had been practicing at the community center, clarity. The night before the presentation, I doubted myself. My accent felt heavier in my mind. My grammar suddenly seemed fragile again. But then I remembered the man who said, "Maybe I can try." So I tried. During the session, I spoke slowly, clearly. No complex vocabulary. Just real, practical English. Clear communication reduces confusion. Ask direct questions. Don't assume understanding. I expected criticism. Instead, something surprising happened. Colleagues nodded. They took notes. They asked follow-up questions. One senior manager even said, "This is exactly what we needed." I walked out of that room with a new realization. Purpose outside of work had strengthened me inside of work. Helping others had built my confidence muscles. And confidence, once developed, transfers. Research in behavioral psychology supports this idea. When you repeatedly take small risks in low-pressure environments, your brain becomes more tolerant of stress. You rewire your response to fear. Volunteering had been my training ground. Work became my test. But the real challenge came later. A few weeks after that presentation, I was offered an opportunity. A lateral move into a role that involved community outreach and employee development. It was less traditional. Slightly less stable. But deeply aligned with what I had been doing outside of work. The safe choice was to stay. The meaningful choice was to move. My spouse and I talked for hours. We calculated expenses. We discussed long-term goals. Immigration had already taught us that nothing is guaranteed. Finally, my spouse said something I will never forget. "You found purpose helping strangers. Maybe it's time to trust that purpose with your own future." That sentence felt like permission. So I accepted the new role. It wasn't dramatic. No fireworks. Just paperwork and a new calendar invite. But internally, it was a shift from survival to intention. I was no longer just adapting to America. I was contributing to it. And here is what I learned. Purpose does not eliminate risk. It makes risk meaningful. Today, when I mentor new employees, especially immigrants, I see a younger version of myself in their hesitation. I tell them something simple. Your accent is not a weakness. Your story is not a limitation. Your journey is your advantage. Because it is true. The United States is built on stories like ours, people who arrive uncertain, struggle quietly, and eventually find a way to serve others. Helping others did not just change my confidence. It reshaped my career. It strengthened my marriage. It redefined my identity. And the journey is still unfolding. Because purpose is not a destination. It is a direction. So let me ask you again. Who can you help today? And how might that small act quietly transform your own life tomorrow? When purpose became my identity. There was a time when I introduced myself by my job title. What do you do? That question used to define my confidence. But something changed after I shifted roles and leaned fully into community outreach and mentoring. My introduction became different. I help people find their voice. Not as a slogan. As a truth. In the United States, identity is often connected to productivity. You are measured by performance, achievements, promotions. But over time, I learned that impact leaves a deeper mark than status. One afternoon, a young immigrant employee came into my office. She had been quiet for months. Hardworking. Reliable. Invisible. I don't think I belong here, she said. That sentence felt familiar. We talked for nearly an hour. Not about technical skills. Not about performance metrics. But about confidence. About cultural adjustment. About the fear of sounding different. I asked her to practice one simple sentence out loud. My perspective is valuable. She laughed at first. It sounded unnatural to her. So we repeated it. Slowly. Clearly. My perspective is valuable. Sometimes real English practice is not about vocabulary. It is about belief. Weeks later, she volunteered to present at a team meeting. It was not perfect. She paused. She searched for words. But she did it. Afterward, she sent me a message. I think I'm starting to believe it. That moment meant more to me than any performance review I had ever received. Purpose had become personal. But with growth always comes a new layer of challenge. As my role expanded, expectations grew too. More responsibility. More people depending on me. More emotional energy required. There were days I felt stretched thin. Helping others is meaningful. But it can also be heavy. I had to learn another lesson: boundaries. In American work culture, especially in mission-driven roles, burnout is common. When you care deeply, you risk overextending yourself. I started scheduling quiet time. No meetings. No calls. Just reflection and planning. At first, I felt guilty. But I remembered something I once told a volunteer. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So I practiced what I preached. My marriage benefited too. Our weekly protected evening became non-negotiable. Sometimes we talked about serious topics. Other times, we just laughed about cultural misunderstandings, like the first time we misinterpreted an American idiom and responded completely out of context. Living in the U.S. still brought challenges: taxes, healthcare forms, complex systems, but it no longer felt like we were surviving alone. We were building intentionally. And here is the quiet truth. Helping others did not magically solve my insecurities. It transformed my relationship with them. I no longer asked, "Am I enough?" I asked, am I contributing? That shift changed everything. Contribution creates connection. Connection builds confidence. Confidence strengthens relationships. It becomes a cycle. Sometimes I think back to my first months in America, the loneliness, the hesitation, the constant self-doubt. If someone had told me then that purpose would grow from those very struggles, I might not have believed them. But pain often prepares you for empathy. The moments when I felt lost became the moments that allowed me to guide others. And now, when I stand in front of a group, whether at work or in the community, I no longer focus on how I sound. I focus on who might feel less alone after listening. That is purpose. Not applause. Not perfection. Impact. And the journey is still unfolding. Because the most powerful question is not, what have I achieved? It is, who can you help today? And what might happen if you start with just one small act? The quiet realization that changed everything. If you had told me years ago that my life in the United States would be shaped not by ambition, but by service, I would have smiled politely and disagreed. I came here chasing opportunity. I stayed because I discovered meaning. There is a difference. Opportunity asks, what can I gain? Purpose asks, what can I give? And somewhere between long workdays, difficult marriage conversations, volunteer Saturdays, and imperfect English sentences, I stopped measuring my life by achievement alone. I began measuring it by impact. One evening, after a community workshop, I sat alone in my car before driving home. The parking lot was almost empty. The building lights were turning off one by one. I thought about the journey. The fear of speaking. The tension in my marriage. The career uncertainty. The cultural confusion. None of it disappeared overnight. But each struggle shaped me into someone who could understand others more deeply. That is the quiet power of hardship. It prepares you to help someone who is exactly where you used to be. In the U.S., people often talk about finding yourself. But I discovered something different. You don't find yourself. You build yourself through choices. Small choices. Choosing to volunteer when you feel tired. Choosing to listen when your partner feels unheard. Choosing to speak up when staying silent feels safer. These decisions seem ordinary. But repeated over time, they transform identity. Today, when I meet new immigrants, I don't just teach practical English phrases like, "Could you please clarify?" I would like to schedule an appointment. Thank you for your time. I also teach confidence through example. I tell them, you don't need perfect English to live a meaningful life in America. You need courage. You need patience. You need connection. And sometimes, you need to help someone else before you fully believe in yourself. My marriage is stronger, not because it avoided conflict, but because we faced it honestly. My career is more aligned, not because it is risk-free, but because it reflects who I am becoming. My identity is clearer, not because I eliminated fear, but because I act despite it. And here is the truth I want you to remember. Helping others will not make your life easier. It will make your life deeper. There were nights I felt exhausted. There were moments I doubted my decision to shift roles. There were conversations in my marriage that felt uncomfortable and raw. But depth always requires vulnerability. Now, when someone asks me, "What do you do?" I no longer hesitate. I help people believe they belong. Because belonging is powerful. In a country as diverse and complex as the United States, belonging is not automatic. It is created through kindness, clarity, and courage. And maybe that is the real message of this journey. Purpose is not something you wait to discover. It often appears when you respond to someone else's need. So before you close this story, pause for a moment. Think about your own life. Your own struggles. Your own fears. Who around you might be facing something similar? Who can you help today? Maybe it's a coworker who feels invisible. Maybe it's your spouse who needs to be heard. Maybe it's a stranger navigating a new country. Or maybe it's the person you see in the mirror. Because sometimes, the first person you must help is yourself. And when you do, your journey will quietly inspire others in ways you cannot yet imagine. This is not the end. It is only the next chapter of a life built on purpose, resilience, and real human connection. And your chapter is still being written. The ripple effect I never expected. Months passed. Life did not suddenly become perfect. Bills still arrived. Deadlines still existed. Marriage still required effort. English still demanded attention. But something subtle had changed. The small acts of helping, explaining a form, encouraging a coworker, listening without interrupting, had created a ripple effect I never expected. One day, at a local community event in the U.S., a man approached me. I did not recognize him at first. "You helped my wife last year," he said. "She was afraid to speak in public. Now she leads parent meetings at our child's school." I stood there quietly. I barely remembered the session. It had been one evening among many. A few simple practice sentences. A little encouragement. But for them, it was a turning point. That moment humbled me. We often underestimate small actions because they feel ordinary to us. But to someone else, that same action may feel life-changing. And that is when I truly understood the deeper meaning behind the question. Who can you help today? Not tomorrow. Not when you feel more confident. Not when your English is perfect. Today. In the United States, life moves fast. Everyone is busy building careers, paying mortgages, chasing stability. It is easy to believe we do not have time to help others. But helping does not always require hours. Sometimes it is. A 5-minute conversation. A clear explanation. A patient response instead of an irritated one. And here is the surprising truth. The more I focused on helping, the less I focused on my insecurities. When your attention shifts outward, your fears shrink. Psychologists describe this as prosocial behavior increasing overall well-being. When we contribute to others, our brain releases chemicals associated with satisfaction and connection. In simple words, helping feels good because we are wired for connection. Looking back at my journey in America, I see 3 clear stages. First, survival. Then, adjustment. Finally, contribution. Survival was about me. Adjustment was about understanding the system. Contribution was about serving within it. That 3rd stage changed everything. My marriage matured because we stopped asking, "Is this country hard?" and started asking, "How can we grow here?" My career expanded because I stopped hiding and started offering. My identity strengthened because I aligned my actions with my values. And now, when I think about the future, I don't feel the same fear I once felt when I first arrived in the United States. Uncertainty still exists. But fear no longer controls me. Because purpose creates stability from the inside, even when external circumstances shift. If you are listening to this story as English practice, let me say something clearly. You do not need advanced vocabulary to live a powerful story. You need courage, consistency, and compassion. Repeat this simple sentence with me. I can make a difference. Slowly. I can make a difference. That sentence is not just English practice. It is mindset practice. And maybe, just maybe, your difference will begin the same way mine did. With one small act. One conversation. One decision to show up. So before this chapter closes, I want to leave you with something deeper than motivation. I want to leave you with curiosity. If helping others transformed my marriage, strengthened my career, and reshaped my identity, what might it do for you? And what story will you tell one day about the moment you decided to care? The journey continues. And the next chapter might begin with you. If I had never chosen to help. Sometimes I ask myself a difficult question. What if I had never walked into that community center? What if I had chosen comfort over contribution? On the surface, my life might still look fine. A stable job. A functioning marriage. A quiet routine. But something inside me would still feel incomplete. Because purpose does not come from ease. It comes from engagement. There is a version of me that stayed silent at work. A version of me that avoided uncomfortable conversations at home. A version of me that waited to feel ready. That version still exists somewhere in memory. But the difference between that person and who I am today is simple. Action. Small, consistent action. In America, especially in fast-moving cities and competitive workplaces, it's easy to compare yourself to others. Better English. Higher salary. Bigger house. Stronger network. Comparison creates pressure. Contribution creates peace. The more I focused on helping, the less I compared. I no longer asked, "Am I ahead?" I asked, "Am I useful?" That shift protected my mental health more than any achievement ever could. And here's something I rarely say out loud. There were moments when helping others felt inconvenient. When I was tired. When I wanted privacy. When I felt emotionally drained. But almost every time I showed up anyway, I left feeling lighter. Service has a strange effect. It costs energy, but it also restores it. One winter evening, after a long day, I almost canceled a mentoring session. The weather was cold. Traffic was heavy. I felt exhausted. But I went. The person I met that night had just failed a certification exam. They felt embarrassed and discouraged. We didn't solve everything. We didn't create a perfect plan. But we talked. And before leaving, they said, "Thank you for not making me feel small." Driving home, I realized something important. Helping others is not about fixing their problems. It's about protecting their dignity. That realization changed the way I approached everything, my marriage, my work, even my own self-talk. When I made mistakes, instead of saying, "I'm not good enough," I learned to say, "I'm still growing." That is also real English practice. Replace "I can't" with "I'm learning." Replace "I'm not ready" with "I'm preparing." Language shapes identity, and identity shapes destiny. Looking at my journey in the United States now, I no longer see just an immigration story. I see a transformation story. From fear to voice. From isolation to connection. From survival to purpose. And the most powerful part? It all began with helping someone else. Not a dramatic act. Not a viral moment. Just a decision to care. So let me ask you something deeper than before. If you never choose to help, who might remain unseen? And if you do choose to help, who might you become? The final chapter is not about me. It's about you. Because this story was never meant to end with my journey. It was meant to awaken yours. The final chapter, and the beginning of yours. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, then you already know, this was never just a story about English. It was never just about immigration, or marriage, or career growth in the United States. It was about transformation through service. When I first arrived in America, I believed success would give me confidence. But I was wrong. Contribution gave me confidence. Helping others did not remove my accent. It removed my shame. It did not eliminate my problems. It gave my problems meaning. It did not guarantee stability. It built inner strength. And maybe that is the message someone listening today needs to hear. You are waiting to feel ready. You are waiting for better English. You are waiting for more money, more clarity, more certainty. But purpose rarely waits for perfect conditions. It appears in ordinary moments. A coworker struggling silently. A spouse feeling unheard. A new immigrant confused by paperwork. A friend losing confidence. And sometimes, it appears in you. The most powerful shift in my life happened when I stopped asking, "How do I succeed here?" and started asking, "How do I serve here?" That question changed my marriage. It reshaped my career. It healed parts of my identity that insecurity had quietly damaged. If you practice English with this story, remember this simple structure. Past, I was afraid. Present, I am growing. Future, I will contribute. Say it slowly. I was afraid. I am growing. I will contribute. That is not just grammar practice. That is life practice. Living and working in the United States taught me something profound. Belonging is not granted. It is created through courage and kindness. You create belonging when you speak, even imperfectly. You create belonging when you listen with patience. You create belonging when you help someone else feel seen. And one day, you will look back at your hardest season and realize it was preparing you to guide someone else. So before this story closes, I want to leave you with one final reflection. Years from now, when someone asks you about your journey, what will you say? Will you describe only the obstacles? Or will you describe the people you lifted along the way? Because in the end, people may forget your job title. They may forget your accent. They may forget your resume. But they will remember how you made them feel. And that is purpose. So today, wherever you are, in a small apartment, in a busy American office, in a quiet moment of doubt, ask yourself one simple question. Who can you help today? The answer might change someone else's life. And without you realizing it, it might quietly transform yours. This is not goodbye. It is an invitation. Your story is still being written. Before you leave this story, pause for just 1 second. I didn't find purpose because I was strong. I found purpose because I was struggling. I didn't become confident because my English was perfect. I became confident because I chose to help someone while I was still imperfect. And maybe, that's where your transformation begins too. If you've ever felt invisible in a new country, if you've ever doubted your voice, your marriage, your career, if you've ever asked yourself, do I really belong here? Then this channel was created for you. This isn't just real English story practice. This is real life. Real growth. Real purpose. Here, we don't just practice English. We practice courage. We practice clarity. We practice becoming. And this is only one chapter. In the next story, I'll share the moment when everything almost fell apart, the setback that nearly made me quit helping others, and what happened next changed the direction of my life in America forever. You don't want to miss that. If this story touched you, helped your English, or reminded you that you're not alone, subscribe for more powerful real English stories about life, marriage, growth, and purpose in the United States. Like this video to support meaningful content. Comment below, who can you help today? Your answer might inspire someone else. Remember, you don't need perfect English to live a powerful story. You just need the courage to begin. And your beginning might be today. See you in the next chapter.